I've always believed in teaching reading through people's personal stories or narratives. And I just want to say this to you. Growing up in my family, stories were prominent, and we learned a lot from our parents from stories. As a teacher, I've always believed that what people want to learn is often the words to use about themselves. I have a company called Townsend Learning Center, in which we work with people from all ages, children all the way to adults, who have any kind of barriers toward learning or work. We've evolved to be more of a vocational rehabilitation company, and we work with veterans and injured workers, teaching them skills for employability. So I came up with a program called the Story Learning Project, and I want to tell you 3 different ways we used it before we used it here in this program. I'll be in the appendix. The first one is Annie. Annie is a 70-year-old African-American woman that was raised in South Carolina with 11 other children and a very sick mother because she was always having children. She was always in bed. And Annie's father was never home, so these kids kind of each had a job. She met a man when she was 15 and came up to Ohio, and he did not allow her to learn to read or even write her name. He wanted to keep her under his thumb, and so he prevented her from going to school or learning anything. And so when I was volunteering for a literacy program, which was kind of an aside to my regular work, I asked for the most illiterate person they could give me because I wanted to try out this approach. And I said, I don't want someone that can read at the 2nd grade level. I want someone that is truly illiterate. They said, well, funny you should say that because we have this lady that no one wants to take on, Annie. So I talked to her for a while, and I found out that there are 2 things she's passionate about. One is quilting, and the other is church. Her whole world is about Jesus, God, and church. And so I got her to talk to me about it, and she was so terrified that I was going to ask her to read anything that I didn't even do it the first time around with her. But the second time I met with her, I said, okay, talk to me about your quilt, and I'm going to write down what you say. And so she spoke, and I wrote. She saw me writing, and then I stopped after the first sentence, and I said, okay, Annie, I'm going to just turn this around and ask you to read this. And she said, oh, no, I can't. And I said, come on, I'll read it first. You said it, I'll read it back to you. Read it back to her, and I said, okay, Annie, read this. She read it as I pointed at the words, and I said, you just read. And I kid you not, she broke down and cried. She was so happy. And so from there, we went on and did flashcards and eventually some phonics because you can't teach reading strictly through this method. And I'm not suggesting that you do. But this is a kickstart. This is a way to get people's consciousness and ego into the game if they're very reluctant to learn. Harvey's father brought him to the Learning Center in order to learn to read. And here again, he said, here's Harvey. He's never going to learn. He's stupid. And he said it in front of Harvey. I was just sort of standing there looking sad. And I said, okay, Dad, you go sit in the waiting room. Let me have Harvey. And I sat him down and I said, Harvey, is that true? And he said, yeah, I really can't read much more than my name. And I said, well, why would you want to read? Why do you want to learn to read? Oh, my father thinks I should. No. Why do you want to learn to read? Well, actually, and he pulls out of his pocket this crumpled mass of letters. And the letters were from his girlfriend. And he said, I want to read these. So I said, well, give me one of those. And then, using a computer, I typed it in large font, first sentence, read it to him, he read it back, and so forth. And then I said, okay, we have 15 minutes left. Let's, make some flashcards, some vocabulary words, but let's write a few sentences to your girlfriend. So he wrote a very brief letter to his girlfriend. And when I took him out to the waiting room, I didn't say a thing, but he went up to his father, opened up, and read the letter to his father. And his father hugged him. And again, there were tears. So it was just like very gratifying method. So we're talking about literacy training. Here, I might have mentioned to you that my company works with veterans. We had, a few years ago, the last of the World War II veterans in our community who was so traumatized by his experience that he would not leave his home. So I had to send an instructor to him. And what we were asked to do by the Veterans Administration was teach him computer skills. And what we decided to do was, we'll teach him computer skills, Word, but we're going to use his story, whatever he wants to talk about during the war years. And the first thing, I don't know if you know any World War II veterans, but they don't want to talk about it at all. No, not going there. But little by little, he started to tell his story about being captured by Nazis and being sent to a war camp. And it was this book is about that thick. We went to Kinko's and had it bound. But each day he was a pretty good keyboarder. He did not have literacy problems. He needed computer skills. But again, we were using his personal story, and he started to tell it. And it's a cliffhanger. At any point in this story, you think, he's going to get killed. But he's right there in front of you, so you know he made it. But he escaped, and it's all in the book. He died a few months after we finished the book, and my instructor, Sharon, went to the funeral, and the family had this laying out right next to the casket. And they were all reading it, and his widow was weeping, and it was sort of like the central thing about him, and they were so honored, and I guess he asked for 10 copies to distribute to people in the family. So my premise here is personal narratives motivate learning. With any age, adult, child, it's always best to use something that's interesting and motivational to them. And what we find is most of us want to learn about ourselves. We want to learn about things that are important to us. And the idea is that if you use learner-generated language, speaking, listening, reading, writing, constantly reinforcing each other, that at least if you start there, then you can branch out to more generic materials. So here again, we're not saying that the whole time you work with them, you only work with their personal narratives, but it is a wonderful way to get them started. The way this worked here in Potrero, and I've done this 2 years, and I hope to keep doing it again. The way it works is we buy inexpensive cameras from the drugstore. Send them down here, or I give them to my friend Jackie, and she gets them down here. And everyone shares a camera. Not every single person needs their own camera, but one camera is good for about 2 or 3 different people. They are instructed to take photographs of something that matters to them, which could be their children, their priest, their house. One did beautiful photographs of a horse. It could be anything, but it needs to matter to you. And then when I come here, I would say, tell me about this picture. I will speak Spanish as best I can when I ask the questions. And sometimes they'll say, that is a picture of my house, or es mi casa. And I say, you have to draw them out to get more language than just one sentence. The interviewing process takes a little bit of work, again, because you have to either speak Spanish or English, depending on, or some kind of combination, depending on the ability of the person you're talking to. And you need to be able to ask questions to elicit more information than just simple facts. The photos are actually right there in front of us, and I'm typing next to them on the computer. I mean, the photograph is literally right there. Now, this doesn't look good yet. Photos up here and the text is underneath. But I'm finding it's a lot easier to just translate right then and there what they're saying into English. And plus, they're watching you do that, and they're seeing their words form on the screen immediately. So it's like instant reinforcement. We assembled a book with all 10 participants in it. Having all 10 in one book was one of the best things that we did. We were going to have each one get their own book. We did this in 1 week. In 1 week, we had 5 interviews. Some people had such sparse interviews, it would have been a very skinny little book. So putting them all together in one book not only made a better book, but it had the unexpected advantage of people loving to read about each other. And when we get to some of the curriculum that we use with this book, you can see that the more text in the book, the better. So we assembled the books. Now, I used iPhoto. I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to find a less expensive way of doing this, because the book you've got there is $40. And it's just, even if we do get a grant to cover this, right now I just use my company's money to do this because it's a labor of love. But someday I'd like to see this book for about $10 instead of 40. Maybe you have some suggestions. But it's really important to verify all the information. We distributed the books, and once I packaged these and sent them up here, they ceremoniously gave them out, and people were so excited because many of them have never been in print before, or some may not have too many books, or any books at all. So it was photographs of them, their narrative, their friends were seeing it. They were really quite blown away. And here's a picture of them showing the books that they got. People first, of course, went to their own story, their own narrative, and they read it, and then the words they didn't know, they made into flashcards and put the English on one side and the Spanish on the other. It is possible to do this with a group. I mean, I already showed you one way by having the group listen and watch. In other words, if I'm interviewing you and you're telling me about yourself and everyone else is here listening to your words and watching me type it, as long as they can see it, there's learning that takes place. But another way might be a group elicited experience, language experience approach. Back in the day when a lot of teachers were using that, would have a group of students, and maybe they went on a field trip to the volcano, and they come back and they're talking about their trip to the volcano. And you might say, you know, it was really a rough road and I was scared the car was going to fall off the side. And then you might say, yeah, and it was wonderful the first time we got sight of the volcano. So putting all that together as a group narrative, maybe with a large chart, you know, and handwriting it, what the group says, and then typing it up and distributing it would be another way to do it as a group. I've tried this with 5-year-olds. 5-year-olds, just by nature, their age, aren't reading yet. And so sometimes parents would bring us a 5-year-old and say, my 5-year-old can't read, and we'd say, well, I mean, why should they read? They're only 5 years old. Come back when they're 7. But sometimes I would sit down with a 5-year-old and just say, okay, tell me about your birthday. You just had your birthday, tell me, what did you get? And everything that they would tell me, I would write down, and then they would draw the picture next to it, and then we would clip that together and make a little book, a language experience book. So there's sort of a way of using this technique with little children. This is cloze activity. I don't know if you've heard of CLOZE, but it's another way of promoting understanding or comprehension. And the idea here is you take one of the passages and leave out either, you could leave out every 7th word or random words, or you could leave out all the nouns. You can omit whatever you want to omit and put those words at the bottom of the page. And then as the person reads, they choose the words from the bottom of the page and they put them in the blank. That is a great little exercise to use kind of a holistic approach of working with text. Another approach that I really like, I don't know if any of you have ever bought a book that is Spanish on one side and English on the other. Like I have a Pablo Neruda poetry book, which I love because his poetry was meant to be in Spanish, but for me, I still got to read it in English to understand every word. But doing that, taking their narrative and putting Spanish on one side and English on the other, what you do is you suggest, read the English side, and then if you need help, go over to the Spanish side and see if you can get it from context there. I mean, there's no end to what you can do with this. It works, it empowers people personally, and also it brings people together culturally. So I just really hope that you'll go out and try this. You can see it's easy. You don't have to have a computer. It can be done with pencil and paper. That's how I did it for years. I'm going to write what you say, and then I'm going to turn around and show it to you, and then we're going to make flashcards, and we're going to make lessons, and we're going to read each other's. So it doesn't have to have any technology, but it's kind of cool to use the photographs, because we all know that photographs are the whole other part of the brain that we're connecting with language.